Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of History Lessons. I'm your host, the journalist Sin-seer, and tonight I'm joined by no other than Shawn J. Period. Thank you for the opportunity and joining me this evening.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. Great meeting you recently, and just thank you for the opportunity as well.
Absolutely. We want to take it back and then work our way up to 2025 to see what you have currently going on. But for those who may not know, where were you born and raised?
Richmond, Virginia.
Take us back to teenage years, Richmond, Virginia.
Man, now we are we dealing with teenage year as far as music or just teenage years life?
We're going to get to the music. Let's get to life and
Okay,
then how that transitioned into music.
okay, yeah, teenage years, Richmond, Virginia. Uh well, first of all, obviously it's a place. It's not like New York, where I currently reside. And, we'll speak about that some, but definitely you have to have a car, right? So driver's ed is super important to a teen to be able to. They offer it in school. I took that in high school, right? So as a teen, it definitely is aspirational to get to the point where you have a car, able to drive and stuff like that. Um, as far as like people wise, definitely because it's the South and Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. At a point in history, you had I could tell when I go back to Richmond now, the diversity is like, I mean, it's anywhere from Hindu to Puerto Rican to whatever, and you had little pockets, but it mainly was black and white. So, and you didn't technically have any real deep tensions that happened during that time, but it definitely was. You could see how over the course of time, various people started to move there. It's a college town, it's major. It's on 95, so a lot of people traveling north to south go through there. So just growing up there, it was great because we got a chance to really like be with a lot of different people, and particularly as it progressed. So, it was great, a great place to grow up.
Very dope. As far as musical influences, before you got into music, teenage years, who were you listening to around that time?
I would say the group that when I think back on it, the group that really just pushed me over was actually Gangstar. Now I had been listening to other groups prior to that, right? And but I remember a cousin of mine, Tyrone, had given me a VHS tape. Tyrone he grew up in the city at points in time, so he had connections where people would get. I remember he gave loaned me a VHS tape with all of these music videos from King T to Power Rule to all these different people, and Gangstar's Manifest was on that. So I even though I had prior influences, I definitely say that that was a pivotal moment for me as far as the trajectory of where I'm at. And obviously you get the other influences that we all had. The Tribe Called Quest. Um, I remember going to, let's say, they call it New York City Fresh Fest. It was a concert that came to Richmond. Obviously, it toured around, and so like Davy D and Max, Fat Boys. So the list of Houdini and Eric B and Rakim. So a lot of the staple artists. But Gangstar I count that as a pivotal point. Hearing that on like AM radio, and from that point, then when I ended up hearing it, watching the video, was definitely hooked. So,
Right,
definitely one of my top groups.
right. Now, as far as the Virginia scene, did you guys have a music scene earlier on?
I'm gonna say Richmond because it's like right below DC. So DC was known for go-go, so you had a little bit of that. Scene wise, you had people come out of there like older artists like Plunky and the one that's a Juju, and um D'Angelo didn't come out until like I was already in New York. You had the stories of Teddy Riley moving down there, and a lot of so but during that time, I can't think of it was producer Mad. He was one of the ones that came out of there. Nothing like you would think, like, oh man, I can name that artist, that for my generation at least, right?
Right.
But once I moved to New York in the early '90s, then that's when D'Angelo was starting to pop off, and Timberland and Missy Elliott, from the beach area. Obviously, you had your DMV, the DC area folks as well. So, but I would say it would Richmond sits in a space where it's it has I think it probably has more something right now than it had, and but it's always little pockets, because it's a town that people come to and they bring their influences too. So
Right. For you personally, how did you get into hip hop? Most producers, MCs will say, breakdancing, DJing. For you personally, how did you get into hip hop earlier on?
I would say that I mentioned that cousin Tyrone. I'm trying to think of. I remember we would. I can't remember the guy that sang the double dutch bus. So that's kind of a thing. Like, but it's obviously it's still rap, right? Like hip hop, but it was just like a different form. And I remember hearing that, learning all the lyrics to it. Um, you know, and then I remember like being like in like little local like break groups. So it was the combination of all the disciplines, right? Like started where you hearing someone do work on music. So I'm interested in like DJing a little, got a little realistic mixer. Um, and my dad was an actual big influence in just me getting into music overall. And I remember it was one Christmas that I wanted to get a four wheeler, right? Because in the South, obviously, ATV in the dirt, all this stuff. And I remember I had a three wheeler that got stolen, and then my dad went and found the guy that stole it. Was like he said, bring that back. My son is gonna be back, and then he ended up he busted it up, but he brought it back, right? So, um, but I wanted, let's say, to advance to a four wheeler, and I remember the Christmas where it was like, oh man, I thought I'm gonna get this four wheeler, and I didn't get it. And my dad, who was into he used to always take me to the record shop with him. He would buy records. He had his own system. He actually bought me a JVC um, system, so speakers, turntables, tape deck, tuner, and all of that stuff like that. And I would say that moment, as far as me personally getting into hip hop, that was the moment that where I went from, let's say, listening, casual listening, to wait a minute, I have a tool here that I can use for something. So once he bought that for me, I went to Peaches Records and Tapes. It was on Midlothian Turnpike, and my first record that I purchased, or series of records, but the two that stand out to me was Salt and Pepper, right? Salt with the Daily Pepper, I think is the name of it, and DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. So that from the tangible side of hip hop, that was my first touching. So I would say it was definitely, I count that as the DJ side, even though I had heard, of the music and stuff like that. But to me, physically touching it and becoming a part of hip hop, not just a listener, that was the moment.
Right. And from there, where did you find yourself into producing first or being an MC after that?
MC definitely was doing, and because the producing thing, you just heard, I remember not even understanding, like, I didn't understand about the whole drum machine thing until you would see it in videos and things like that. And so it's just you playing records, and you rap over it or do whatever. So it started out as an MC, and from that point, it was like I remember hearing Karis One, and then I was like, okay, and I'm thinking, and then I got like a was a Digitech time machine. It was like this thing with this super low sample time, like 4 seconds, whatever. I actually have one. Someone gave me one within the last couple of years. I don't know the timing on it, but I was like, all right, sampling, you would trigger and stuff like that. And then I became a producer purely to just do beats for me to rap over, right? So my first drum machine when I was in, I think it was eighth or ninth grade, was the Roland TR, I think it's 505. So from that standpoint, like, but you can see all that progress from me getting those records, and then it was like, okay, well, oh, people are doing beats, and then okay, well, what is that? And then you investigate it. You go to the local, music store, and then you save up your money, and all the different things, to get that. So, but I started out as an MC that needed beats for me to rap over, and that's when I started doing it. And then a couple of people in high school said that they liked the music. Like, I probably would have just continued, hey, I'm just doing it for myself. But someone acknowledged that they heard the potential in me as far as a producer. So then I started developing that a little bit more, because obviously, everyone's looking for that point in the thing that adds value to people's lives, right? And I'm
Right.
saying, okay, if you're saying you're liking that, then okay, all right, let's see what we can do. So,
Right. Now, were you self-taught as a producer, or did you have a mentor?
let me think. I was I was self-taught earlier on, but then it's been obviously self-taught to a degree, putting in the work at home, just fumbling around, right? Just doing stuff. And then a lot of, like, let's say friends people I befriended through going to the music store or different things, people in high school, middle school, and then you learn from each other. And then once we got signed in the group down south, then official mentors became the ones that worked on that album. It was the Beat Nuts, T Ray, Stretch Armstrong, um, Daddy Reef or Reef, and some other people. And then locally too, I had a guy named Dave. He was part of this group called the Funkaholics. So it was different people around, but the professional influence came when we got signed. But mentors here and there, friends that people I had befriended.
Right. So you're producing beats for yourself. Did anything materialize earlier on as a solo MC?
Uh, as a solo MC, I mean, I think the thing that stands out was, people with either, let's say, battle rap. So it was like you had Coogee Rap and Kumo D going at each other, whatever. So I remember being in the lunchroom, and this is super shy kid, whatever, in the lunchroom, and it was this particular guy who just, I rap. Maybe I did a little rap for the guys who I sat with at the lunch table. They beat on the table, and they were like, "Oh, okay, okay." But I left it there, and then there was a guy in the school who was a rapper, and he challenged me in the lunchroom. And I remember, it is funny. This line is hilarious. Obviously, it was a bite off of LL Cool J, but the punchline was, I don't remember what it was leading up to it, but the punchline was, "I crunch you like a Cool Ranch Dorito," right? You know, and I mean and it was like, oh, Now obviously you look back on it like, what? I crunch you like a Cool Ranch Dorito, right? So, but from that point, just them encouraging me to just do that, and then end up having a battle, because it was the whole thing. Oh, you want to battle? You battle? Just going back and forth throughout a period of time. That really solidified me to just like the production. Someone acknowledges that they like something, so human nature is to tend to lean into things that people say that they like. That's the way God will use things to just say, hey, you're not getting beaten a whole lot of resistance over here. You're getting certain encouragement this way. Maybe it's something you should pursue. Maybe because a lot of times people will point out your giftings that you take for granted, or that you don't recognize, you know. So, yeah, thanks to the guys in the lunchroom.
No doubt. Now, did you form a group or with a crew before Down South actually materialized?
Definitely. I mean, I would say the one that came up, it was a guy named DJ Rusty. He So it was he and I. We would do the talent shows together. Um, and well, his name was Rusty. I can't even think of the what his name is Rusty. I can't think of the DJ name now. But he and I formed the group. He was a guy who came to the school, high school later on. My cousin, I can't forget that. My cousin Marlon. We technically were the first group because we were influenced. We were influencing each other. Um, to do it. He was an MC, and we my uncle took us to the what's the thing? The New York City Fresh Fest, like I mentioned earlier. Like, so the official first group was with my cousin Marlon. And then it became, when I went to high school stuff, it was like, okay, he had a DJ with Rusty, DJ group. I was the MC, he was the DJ. And that's when around the time I got the TR 505, the rolling drum machine, and little light groups here and there, but that was the major thing I could think of. Oh, and then I said this right, leading, and in college it was the J team, right, which was all the members, and my cousin Jeremy, who's in the group down south, the third member of the group down south with Mayor, the DJ. All of us have the last name J. Jones is ours, and then it was Nikki and Trey. Their last names were Johnson, and so that was like the J team, right? So, and then even when we got signed, even though Trey and Nikki didn't continue with the group, we had the name, still had the name, the J team. So when we got signed to Big Beat Atlantic, it was Mayor, the DJ, my cousin Jeremy, who was Soda Pop is his professional name, and me. All of us had this last name would start with a J. So we continued that, but we eventually had to go through changing the name, right? Because obviously we signed on paper as the J team, but they were like, no, that name is not gonna work. And we went through the pain of like coming up with a name, finally landed on Down South, from there.
Right. Now with the J team, did you guys shop a demo?
Not with the original members. The four. Once we, once it was Jeremy, Mayor, and myself. We eventually put together a demo tape, and Mayor he was from New York originally. He had moved down. His family still was in New York. We moved to New York and stayed with his family for a long time, to get on that feet. And he was working, his aunt worked with Russell Simmons, so he had, in the summers he would do like internships or work with Def Jam or whatever. So the particular summer, what was it, yeah, summer, and he would do it at winter break too. And he took the demo that we had to, it was during the winter break, he took it to Bobito, right? So Bobito was working at Def Jam, and Bobito liked it. And then obviously Stretch and Bob had a show together, so that's how we connected with Stretch. Stretch at the time was the A&R for Big Beat Atlantic, so that's how we made that connection. But it definitely started from a demo that we did.
How many songs were on that demo?
Man, that's a good question. I remember at least because there was a song we did called Lyricatessen, Big Wheels. Um, 4 or 5, I would say. Could be different than that, but at least I say at least four.
Before that demo and with the group, did you have any other placements with other artists for your production?
Just little local stuff, doing. But mainly, like I said, my production was more just for me to rap over. So no, I didn't technically pursue uh, doing music for other people until I got to New York, and after the group, after we were signed and then we eventually got dropped from the label. I didn't really pursue an independent production career until then. It was all really for just whatever we were doing.
Right. And with that demo, were other labels interested? And how did you guys end up settling for Big Beat?
Yeah, I don't know that would be a question. I mean, I know you had recently interviewed Mayor. I don't know because he was really the one with the connections tied to New York, and I think because obviously your work, Def Jam, was at its pinnacle, right? Like it just was the place, and so even though Def Jam directly didn't um look, look for it, I would say probably yes and no. I don't know, but it wasn't a long list, because with my year working with Stretch, I mean Bob, and then Bob just playing it for Stretch, like it just was kind of an immediate thing, you know, for
Right.
that. So I would say not too many. It wasn't like a frenzy to sign us, kind of thing, if that's what you're asking.
Right. What do you remember about the conversations over at Big Beat prior to signing?
Mm, Pride is, well, because we were in Virginia at the time, right? We didn't have any. It was more for phone calls or something like that. It was no, we didn't actually even, I don't remember, we didn't go to Big B until we were signing. We
Mm,
came, it was during a winter of 90, I think it was 91, right? Going into 92. We got signed in 92, around May, like April, May, something like that. Um, yeah, I mean, the conversations were, just, I guess, general negotiation between the lawyers and, stuff like that. And they were a new label coming up at the time. The president of that label was Craig Coleman, who, funny enough, is the current, to this day, the current CEO of Atlantic. So he went from that company. Big B got absorbed into Atlantic, and then to this day, all that many years later, he is still like the CEO of the company. So, which is crazy when I realized that recently. So,
Right. Who came up with the name Down South?
uh, we all did, and then the label took us through. I mean, that was one of the most stressful things because we were recording and we were trying to find our identity. Like, you need to change the name to J Team, change. So we're working on the album, and I mean, it took us probably a year to just we were coming up with different names. Like, no, it was like, and we were about to settle on this name called the Best Kept Secret or something like that, right? And then this is the time where any sort of biting is prohibited. Anything that leans towards someone else and I remember Diamond D came out with that the best kept secret. It was like, and then it was some name that was tied to um it was tied to a group in LA. So it was like, no, and then but we were just going back and forth, and that was the time when the South had a really hot hand. South has always had, particularly Atlanta, right? Has always had hot hands that come around really fast, right? So that was during the time where Arrested Development, Crisscross, a lot of the Atlanta groups, Jermaine Dupri, all of the different things, Dallas Austin, all the things, and we would go to Atlanta, like we went to like Jack the Rapper, the conference down there, and so we would go to Atlanta a couple of times. So we had an affinity for the South. 'Cause we are in the South, we're Virginia, but like obviously the deeper South. So I don't know which one of us came up with it, but it was like, all right, well, because we would always reference it being in the North. Once you're in the North, you're representing down South, right? Or if you're in Richmond, you're speaking of Georgia as down South, right? So the term would just naturally come out of our mouths, referring to back home, from the perspective of New York, or from the perspective of Richmond to Georgia, down South, and it was like, wait a minute, we're from the South, and it's like, oh, that's perfect, So I say collectively we came up with it.